Hi everyone. Obviously everyone's doing this right now, so
boop boop or flippity flap bloop. Top 10.
yeah. So that's what this is. This is going to be our top 10. We saw a couple different people. StoryTube did their like awards. I think the Honest Book Reviewer has done like top 10 of different genres. There are a couple of ways we thought about doing it, but we figured there's two of us, so rather than each of us doing a top 10 or doing a bunch of videos, we're just going to do one, and it's going to be our top 10, each of our top 10. It was easier for Sir Chonk because he's read about like a third to a quarter of what I read, and also...
It's like a third. Quit your whining.
And he also doesn't like to give anything over a 3. Generally, I think his average is a 2.
No, my average is like a 3.
But he generally... So, when we did...
Should be a 3. You give out 5s like you're giving out popcorn.
I don't. But because of the fact that he's so selective, he only had 11 4s and 5s total, so it was pretty easy for him. I obviously read a lot, and I do give a decent amount of 5s because of my ranking system is a little different. So
too nice.
Whatever. So this is tough because I really am struggling about the order I have these in, and so what I did for my ranking is I basically took what I had earlier in the year, anything I had that I had already read, I took the order I put them in as my top 100 of all time, even though I think, like anything with any reader, that changes, and I'm not 100% sure I agree with my own rankings. But that's what I put them at, and then I just plugged in a few others. But then there were a lot that I was like, should I include this? Should I not include this? So any given day, I could probably change my mind. But we did a list of everything we've read. So, and I've done a lot of recaps and everything, so you can pretty much find the ones that I loved. Or you can come to Goodreads and you can find them there. So, with that being said, we're going to do 5 honorable mentions. I'm doing 4, and Sir Chonk's going to do 1, so I'm going to do 2, and then he's going to do 1, and I'm going to do 2. And then we're going to go back and forth with 10 to 1 of our top 10 reads of the year. This doesn't mean they came out this year. This is just things we read. So, all right. So, without further ado, you going to say something about that?
Here are the honorable mentions.
Okay.
Lord.
All right. So, the first one is for me. I'm doing The Militia House. I really loved this book. It just stuck with me. It was really unique. So, it's essentially a gothic horror, and it's about this group of guys who are they're based in Afghanistan, part of the American military, but they're not like in a war zone really. I mean, that doesn't mean that obviously there's no risk, but they're like, they basically like fix like helicopters that come in. They supply the groups as they go out. I don't know, battalions, platoons, whatever the term is.
And battalions and platoons are two different things.
Whatever. The people who go and actually fight, they like make sure they have their supplies. So they're like, they stay around. So it's kind of boring, essentially, is what it comes down to. They're bored. And where they're set up, there's an old militia house that was there for like the Russian and Afghanistan war. And there's rumors that it's haunted and so on. So, they're obviously like, ooh, let's tell spooky stories because they got nothing else to do. And so it's kind of a unique story because it's like partly just, it reminded me a lot of like a Holden Caulfield, if Holden Caulfield went to war kind of thing. The way he, like the narrator is, like he's sort of snarky. He's kind of doesn't like a whole lot of things. He complains a lot. I like it. It's not like super negative. It's kind of entertaining, but I feel like it's a fairly authentic. I mean, I'm sure not every person in the military, some people are probably excited to be there, but I'm sure there are people who are not. And so it's kind of, disaffected youth. But then the other half is also this super creepy, like kind of traditional gothic horror, but it's also like not traditional because it's set in Afghanistan and it's in this like creepy military setting. And so I just found it very unique, and the writing was fantastic, and just I really loved this. And like, the more I think about it and the, like, further away I've gotten from it, the more I, like, am kind of like, oh, probably I should put this on, like, a best of all time. Like, it really has continued to grow on me, so.
Like a fungus.
So that's in the honorable mentions. I mentioned this a few times this year, Nick Spalding's Old Boys. This is a kind of funny story about a guy who's kind of like, things aren't going so well in his life. His life's kind of falling apart. His wife thinks they should have a trial separation. He's miserable. You know, he hates his job. And he's not that close to his dad. And his dad used to be this like 70s rock star. And so his father basically asks him to come and like stay with him. And they're not close. And so his dad hasn't really given up his like 70s rock star ways. And so he goes and like stays with his dad, and it's like them reconnecting. And I kind of was like, oh, it could be funny. But it's not just could be funny. It was hilarious. And it was just really heartfelt, but just very, very funny. And like, this is the kind of thing, like, if it was a movie, like, you just love it because it's just so, it's both like super funny and super like meaningful, and there is a decent story there. But I flew through this book, and I couldn't get enough of it. I just thought it was so funny. And I definitely want to read more by this author. So those are my first two honorable mentions, Mr. Chong.
All right, I got Look Closer by David Ellis is my honorable mention. I'm not going to say much about this because, spoiler, it's going to show up later on in this video. Starts off slow, gets pretty twisty. Overall, I liked it. Satisfying. Lorp.
Okay, so my next one is The Night Swim by Megan Golden. And I could either go with The Night Swim or Dark Corners because they're both like in the same series. I think I like The Night Swim a little bit more. It's a little more like cold case. There's dual timelines. There's currently a rape trial, and then there's like somebody's missing sister from years ago, and it's like a small town with secrets. And I'm really into that like type of story. And Dark Corners is more of like a, it's like a missing person, kind of has like, there's a guy in prison, they think like he might be somehow connected to it, a little more like race against the clock, kind of legal, kind of, I don't know, not a procedural, but a little more procedural. And this is more just like a podcast kind of cold case type investigation. So this is a little more up my, like kind of up my alley. But the thing I liked about how different they both were is they both have the same character, but it's not like the second one wasn't just more of the same with the character. And so it's nice because I kind of feel like whatever the third book, hopefully there will be in this series, you know, she can kind of do different types of things with this character. So it kind of gives me the feeling that it could potentially kind of be like a Sue Grafton-y kind of thing where she's not a private detective. She's a former journalist, now podcaster. But I do think, you know, you could use that as sort of that traditional like private eye kind of thing. And so I just really enjoyed these. And then my last one is Brother and Sister Enter the Forest. I talked about this a few times. This is a very like visceral, sort of poetic, and I don't want to say like subtle. I mean, it's not super subtle or anything. It's very like, you know, there's a lot of underlying things that aren't necessarily being said, but they're there. It's just, you know, it's not trying to like hide them or be like obtuse or anything. It just happens to be, you know, a little more poetic. So you kind of have to like dig deeper into what's going on. But basically it's about trauma, and it's about these brother and sister and the trauma he's had, but also how that has like, in a way, caused trauma for her. And so his own dealing with like trying to feel like life is worth living, but then also can he connect with his sister again, his mother. So very interesting story. I will warn you, if this is, if you like this kind of book, it'll be something you'll probably love. Reminded me of like a shorter sort of version of A Little Life. So like keep that in mind. It's dark. It's not as depressing, but it's, it's still pretty depressing. And it doesn't have like a neat, happy ending. So if that's going to bother you, it's probably not for you. All right. So now we are going to move into our top 10. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
I don't care in the slightest who goes first. So.
Okay, so I'm going to have Sir Chonk go first then. Just because, yeah, we'll have him go first. Okay, so you're number 10.
All right, I have what I believe is The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. Another fun sort of fantasy, magical realism adventure by Neil Gaiman. We got a couple of kids, well, one who's useless and stupid, and then one who's kind of a part witch almost, dealing with some evil lady. Oh, she's evil. There's an ocean, there's a lane, they're connected. If you like Neil Gaiman, you'll probably like this book. It's pretty excellent.
All right, I'm going to try to read that, I think, this year. Upcoming, not like obviously not in the last like 30 seconds of 2023, but I'm going to try to read it at some point in 2024. So my number 10 is We Spread by Ian Reid. Shocker, I picked an Ian Reid book, but I had read obviously, as you all know, big fan of I'm Thinking of Ending Things, and this year I was able to read We
Never
Spread.
read that book before.
And so I read We Spread and Foe. We Spread is a lot like I'm Thinking of Ending Things. Very similar, like structurally, stylistically, even thematically, yet also very different. So it's about this woman who's an artist, and her partner that she's lived with in her apartment dies, and she's older, and basically they don't think she can function, safely in her apartment by herself. She's starting to have like I don't know if it's dementia, they don't really kind of go into it. It's probably dementia, but she's starting to kind of see things and think things, and so they put her in a home basically, in like an assisted living facility, and all these like creepy things start happening, and she's like realizing like there might be like this conspiracy, and so the way it's, and I think there's so little you can say about his books without ruining his books. So, but what I'll say is if you have read his other stuff, especially if you've read I'm Thinking of Ending Things, it's got the same feeling of like the whole time you just feel very unsettled and uncomfortable and nervous, and it's very anxiety inducing, and it's creepy, but like also you're like, I don't know exactly what is bothering me, I just feel unsettled. And then like the story progresses and it gets like a little weird, and you're like, things are not what they like, not right, something's not right here. And then the end comes, and you're left kind of piecing together everything that's happened at this point to the ending. And then you're sitting there at the ending and trying to like make it all kind of come together. I mean, it's written to come together. It's not super ambiguous or anything, but you're just kind of trying to piece the pieces together. And when you do, it like kind of like kicks you in the ass with like this like overwhelming like emotional impact that kind of has you like reevaluate just the way you kind of look at life, and like so it's like existential dread, but also like a lot of thought-provoking sort of like life-affirming stuff, which again, I feel like if you've read his books you know what I'm talking about, and if you haven't, you're probably like, that sounds weird. So and if you haven't read his books, go read his books. So all right, number 9.
I'm looking forward to Ian Reid's next sequel, which is We're Thinking of Spreading Things, which, as I recall, is a person in a bread factory gets a hold of some peanut butter. Or does he? It's hard to tell.
It's surprising how a person can write like 200 and something pages and just have such an impact.
Yes, and a love of peanut butter.
Anyway.
So my next book, Yar, it be Treasure Island, which is, like the prototypical pirate tale. It's one of the earliest pirate tales, and it's where you get so many of the pirate cliches from, but this is great. Classic adventure-y stuff. If you want to read a classic pirate adventure, this is literally the most classic pirate adventure that ever pirated an adventure.
You just love Robert Louis Stevenson.
I also love Robert Louis Stevenson.
He's a really good writer. I mean, he like obviously we're not going out on a limb and being like, hey, that classic writer?
Ian Reid, but
Yeah, well, Ian Reid's amazing. So, all right. So my number 9 is The Only One Left by Riley Sager. As you're aware, I'm a big Riley Sager fan as well. Obviously, I like...
Sage.
It's not.
Oh.
I like Ian Reid as a writer way more than Riley Sager. Although they're so different, it's really hard to compare. Like, Riley Sager's are just fun. Ian Reid's are like, change my life kind of stuff. But this is absolutely Riley Sager's best book. And, like, I've liked... The thing about Riley Sager is that, like, his worst book... I haven't read Survive the Night, which is the only one I haven't read, and apparently that everyone agrees that's his worst. But his worst book for me, which was The House Across the Lake, was still, like, a very, very solid, fun read. So, like, I just feel like I can't go wrong with his stuff, because even when they're just, like, they're still a fun But this one was just like everything you want in this kind of book. So it's about this woman who essentially she's like can't find a job, and she's like a caregiver for old people, and I can't even remember right now if she gets fired or whatever reason. I think she gets fired. So the only position they can place her in is with this woman who essentially is like a Lizzie Borden kind of thing, where there's like a famous poem that, 80 years ago or 70 years ago or whatever, she supposedly murdered her entire family in this house looking over a cliff. I believe it's in Maine, like on the coast. Ooh. And so she basically has to stay in this house with this like creepy lady who probably murdered her entire family and is the only one left. That's the part of the poem. And it's just everything like you want from this kind of book. Like, it's creepy, it's suspenseful. I like could not stop reading it, but it's like the kind of thing where you get like super anxious while you're reading it, because you're so worried about like what's going to come next, but also part of you's like worried that it's going to like not be satisfying at the end. So it's like as you're flipping the pages, you're like, this is so good, but please don't suck. And then it's just so satisfying. Like, everything in this book was so satisfying. And Riley Sager is obviously, like, for everyone, I know a lot of people like him and read a lot of his books. He's very good, even when, like, you don't love it or you're not, like, totally buying into his twists. He's really good with twists. And this one just, like, I called a lot of them, but they were just so well done. And he just, this is the kind of book that, like, when I left the first Saw movie, I was just, like, grinning when I left, because it was so twisty and smart, and the ending of that movie just made me so happy, because I was just like, oh, it's so good.
You also love Murder by Saws.
No, it's, like, I mean, obviously, if you've seen it, if you haven't seen it, you need to see it, and I'm not going to ruin it for you, but like, the little twists that happen along the way, and, like, you kind of know something's going on, but then when it all comes together at the end, you just leave so satisfied, one, that it tricked you, but also that it was, like, well done. And that's how I finished this book. Like, I just felt so happy. I mean, it's a murder mystery, like, thriller, so it's not, like, good stuff happening, but it just was so much fun and twisty. So, yeah, so that was that one. All right, so Sir Chonk, your next one.
The real twists were the friends we made along the way.
Yep, that's exactly the plot.
Right. Number 8, this is Nettle and Bone by one of Coleridge Girl's favorite new authors.
Yep.
Tea to the Kingfisher. And this is a pretty short book. It's like 200 pages, I think.
Yeah, a lot of her stuff's really short.
Really short, but great dialogue. It's a fairy tale, essentially, where some lady's trying to not get sucked into her sort of sister's fate of getting married to a piece of garbage prince. And so she has these tasks to accomplish. It's not a fun side character. It's a dog made out of bones. It's just tremendous fun with great characters, witty dialogue, and a fun, quick fairy tale. Excellent fun.
All right. And so as I was speaking of fun, twisty books that are suspenseful and that you're on, like, the edge of your seat, and then at the end you're just like, oh, it's so satisfying. Sir Chonk mentioned this earlier. My next one is Look Closer by David Ellis. And it's the same thing where, like, I would say, like, the only one left might be a little more, like, satisfying, like, page by page. Because this was a little slower to get started, where, like, only one left, I was, like, bought in, like, 10 seconds into the book. But look closer. One of the problems with this book is I got it from the library because it was available. And I was, like, just really, like, loving domestic thrillers. And I was in that, like, kick where I was, like, reading a bunch. And eventually they all started to run into each other. And I, like, it just says it's about this guy and his wife and, like, their relationship. And things aren't what they seem. And, you know, like, in the picture, it just looks like a typical domestic suspense kind of book. And it's not at all. Like, this is it's very much like a Gone Girl where, like, yeah, there's, like, I guess it's domestic in the fact it's about a marriage. But it's, like, some of the characters they're deliciously evil. Like, they're so fun, but also, like, really bad people. And it's just a lot of fun. And, like, the twists are great. And at the end, I was just like, how is this book not more popular? It's so twisty, so well put together. Like, it just works so well. So if you like twisty, fun books, this is for you. All right, so now we're on number 7, Sir Chonk.
All right, so for my 7th one, I've got Just After Sunset by Stephen King. This is a collection of about 13 short stories. They're not all that short. There's like 3 or 4 novellas in there that are right around the 80-page mark. So it's got some meat on the old bone. Most of the longer ones are among the better ones, I would say. There's a cool sort of Lovecraftian-esque thing in there. There's a kidnap, murdery, escape thing in there. There's a sort of like heartfelt 9/11 kind of story mixed in there. There's one where a dude basically gets in a fight with a porta potty for half of it. There's a pretty interesting, various mixture of stories in here, and they're really good. There's like one that is kind of a pile of poop, but one crap story out of 13 is actually fantastic for a collection. And there's like 4 that I would say are exceptional, and 2 that I loved. One has a killer, a murdering cat. A cat that like murders people in bizarre kind of ways, I guess. Overall, I was very pleased with this. I didn't expect much out of it, but I thought it was great.
I want to read this cat one.
It's short. It's like 30 pages.
One thing about Stephen King is, like, when I first started reading Stephen King, I read a lot of his short story collections, and he's one of the few writers that I feel like, especially contemporary writers, like, I mean, yeah, Bradbury is a pretty good short story. Obviously, I love his short stories. You know, there's other short story writers. Neil Gaiman actually writes some pretty good short stories. But, like, how many people can you think of who are good short story writers these days?
Well, it's not a medium that people make money at anymore, so therefore it sort of, like, has begun to dissolve by the wayside. Unless you're a person like Stephen King that knows he can, like, write anything he wants, throw a cover on it, and people will buy it. Like, so he can regularly release these because there's a market for anything he does. Most people, if you're a new writer, you can't be like, here's my new book. It's a collection of short stories. Nobody wants that. You know what I mean? So you have, like, anthologies, or you have, like, a guy that's already really well respected, like King or Neil Gaiman or somebody like that.
I mean, there are definitely people out there, but, like, yeah, they just aren't getting, like, you don't see them as much.
How many times do you see short story collections on the bestseller list?
Right.
Unless it's by someone who's a perennial bestseller.
Right, and, like, I mean, to be fair, like, I don't even like a lot of short stories just because they just feel like they're missing something, but he's just really feel like he's good at it. He's one of those few people that I read it and I'm like, yes, this is how it should be done. So my number 7 is Penance by Eliza Clark. This one is about a group of teenage girls who light their friend on fire and kill her.
Yes. Fantastic. I'm sold.
And it's basically the aftermath of this in this sort of small beach town in the UK, and how, like, they're in prison and, like, they've never really revealed what actually happened. And so there's, like, a true crime journalist who's trying to write, like, a book about it. And then there's, like, social media stuff. And it's, like, it's very interesting because every person has, like, their side of the story that was involved, or either the people who committed the crime, or, like, people who were, like, affected by the crime, or friends and family. and you're getting all of these pieces, and like you'll start to feel bad for one of those, like the killers, and then you're like, no, they're a horrible person. That's right, they murdered someone. But like you can kind of be like, oh, well, what if this had happened, or what if somebody had done something about this thing that was going on, because they were bullied at this point, or they had like this really bad family situation. And it just does a really good job, I think, of like kind of like getting you into that mindset, but also like bringing up like big topics like, is true crime healthy? Do we have a weird obsession with these things? Do we sort of turn killers into celebrities? And is that something that is almost appealing to teenagers who are doing anything they can to kind of have an identity and to be noticed? And
is beach a job?
No.
Oh, no. It's not.
And there's like a lot of commentary about social media, and then there's like some twists in it, and like the way it's structured, because it's actually structured. Eliza Clark, she's like, her name, obviously she wrote the book, but the whole book is structured as if it was this manuscript that this journalist wrote, and then this is like what's left of the book, and they decided to publish it because they weren't going to publish it because everyone was so upset by it, but then they decided to publish it anyway. And then there's like transcripts of like different social media posts, and then some podcasts, and like the guys are like, they weren't even hot. If they were hot, it would have been fine if they killed her. Like, like it's just,
obviously. I
mean, it's just one of those things that really like super, super like strong social commentary, but just so well written. Just, I loved this. And I mean, obviously, like, I have a personal, like connection to anything that deals with like violence against women, especially like violence against women, teenage girls, and also like, just the impact on violence and gender bias, on teenage girls, and, what that does to people. So, yeah, I loved this book.
There's not enough books based around immolation, in my opinion.
Okay.
Not enough.
Not enough. I like that word.
Who doesn't? Right. All right, so my number 6 book is Piranesi by Susanna Clark. Here's another fairly short book. It's weird. I usually have that many short books on my favorite list, but here we go. This is really popular. I guess all kinds of people are reading this.
Yeah, I need to read this.
Past year. Spectacularly written. It's kind of, I guess, I don't know if I want to call it a mystery, but it's sort of a mysterious element where you spend a large portion of the book with only like 2 characters. Like I say, like at least half or maybe more of the book is only 2 characters. And one of the characters is very sort of like sporadically shows up and is kind of sketchy, gets referred to by the main character a lot. And there's lots of descriptions of the place where this guy lives, and the place is very non-traditional. It's like tons of statues and like waterways and hallways. Like, where is this dude? Like a museum or something? It's really fascinating, and it's beautifully written. And then sort of as you get more into the story, some things get revealed and stuff. And so like the plot is very good, but I just really love this for the writing and the description. Fantastic. I don't need to tell you, if you're watching one of these videos, you probably already know about this book.
All right. So my number 6 is going to take a little bit of a dark turn, is My Dark Vanessa.
Yes, on fire is not a dark turn.
No, this one is probably one of the most disturbing things I've ever read in my life.
Yeah, Vanessa's not a good name.
It's, and I'm so very, very, I mean, obviously I like dark fiction. You can tell I like a lot of murder stuff. Like, this one is actually like one of the books that I think has probably the strongest content warning. It's about a girl who, she's now in her 30s, but when she was a teenager, she had like a relationship with her high school teacher, and it was a sexual relationship she had with him, and she's still kind of off and on, like they try to like rekindle things, but it's awkward and weird, and she's like not comfortable with it. And what's happened is, right after she graduated, he was accused of essentially like sexually assaulting another girl. And she fought like, to help defend him, and, that they dismissed it. And then now another girl has come forward, and other girls are starting to come forward. And it's starting to look like he has a pattern of essentially grooming and sexually assaulting girls. And so what she's trying to come to terms with is like, did they have a relationship or did he groom her? And was this rape? And if it was, like, I mean, she has issues with their relationship now because he, like, doesn't seem to enjoy having sex with her anymore. And she's like, I think I'm too old for him now at, like, my late 20s. And, you know, she obviously, and then, like, she looks back and she's thinking back to this relationship they had. And, I mean, if you could call it that. And essentially, like, he was, like, giving her Lolita to read. And they were talking about how, like, the characters were misunderstood. And, you know, like, things you really should not be doing, you know, with your 15-year-old student. And I will say, like, the scene where she goes to his house the first time when she's thinking back, and they have sex the first time, it's not even super graphic, but I have never felt so physically ill reading something. It's awful. And what's so good about this book is it's incredibly nuanced and thought-provoking in a way that, like, yes, you're filled with rage through a lot of it because you're just like, oh my God, like, she's just being groomed. He's obviously awful. He's a horrible person. But then she's defending him throughout it, like, even while she's angry at him. And you can understand, like, her thought process, even though, like, you just want to, like, save her and, like, make it not be real and make it not have happened to her. And it's just an excellent read because it definitely makes you think. I mean, it's not making you be like, oh, like, you know, I guess, like, Lolita is like, oh, maybe it's not that bad. And I don't know. I haven't read Lolita. That's on my list of things to read this year. I don't think anyone was, like, pro, like, you know, that relationship. I think she's, like, 9, too, isn't she?
I think she's 12?
Yeah, I know she's, like, really young. I mean, not that, like, 15 and 16 isn't young, but she's, like, unhealthily young. But I guess this is too. But anyway, it's very disturbing, but it's also, like, it's just, like, I've never read something that puts it in such an awkward, like, position to kind of be like, I want to have an opinion here, but also, like, every time you start to have an opinion, the character is making you question your opinions. And you're like, you don't want to be angry at her, but then you're also like, you can understand why she thinks the way she does. And I don't know, it's just very disturbing, but incredibly well written. So obviously, but, you know, comes with a very strong content warning.
So you're saying there probably isn't a Wishbone version of that story?
No, I don't think Wishbone did that one.
All right. Well,
I don't think he did any of the books I read.
Oh, it seems a little edgy maybe for Wishbone.
Yeah.
All right, so we got a lot of Clarks in this list here. But I have another Susanna Clark back-to-back with my number 5th book, which is Jonathan Strange and Mr.
Your number
Norrell. My number 5th, which is what the way the British say it,
Oh, okay.
which is not the way the British say it. But let's pretend that they do. It's a British book, the British way. And this is essentially early 1800s. England's having...
Time Magazine gave it number 1 book of the year.
Well, Time Magazine isn't as smart as me. It only gets 5 for me. So anyway, essentially, like, England's got stuff to deal with, right? There's a lot of political stuff in here, a lot of social commentary. It reads a lot like Jane Eyre reads, even though the plot's completely different. It has a lot of sort of that snarky social analysis that Jane Eyre drops in there. So it's funny in parts. I wish it was a little more of that because they don't do it often enough. But basically, like, there's these 2 dudes, you can guess from the cover who they are, and they can use actual magic, right? They're actual magicians, and they're like the only 2 guys for almost the entire book who can use magic. And it's just like this weird stuff with them, like having these political connections and dealing with this British stuff, and also there's sort of like this fairy world they tap into that's kind of weird, and it's like, what's going on with this fairy dude? Is he like an evil guy, or is he helpful? It's not that hard to figure it out. But anyway, a lot going on in this book. Really well written. It's on the longer side. It's about 900 pages. But I really thought it was fantastic. If you really like Jane Eyre and you were like, what if it was that style but like magic, then yeah, this is kind of what that is, even though the story is very different. Boop. That's
on my list of things to read this year in our challenge.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so
that book.
It's Nettle and Bone again. Like Sir Chonk said, this is basically a traditional fairy tale. it's about a girl who's she has a couple sisters. Her first sister is sent off to marry this prince or king or whatever he is.
The prince.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, typical things like political reasons. And then her sister dies. And then her other sister is sent off. And so she's sent to a nunnery because she can't get married, basically, because she's like the backup plan if the second sister doesn't work out. Or if the second sister can't give him a child, then they're going to have to, like, I don't know, like,
end number 3.
Yeah, essentially end the marriage and then go. So, and then, of course, she discovers that he's basically this abusive, like, scumbag. And so she's come up with this plan to, like, I think kill him, right, basically?
Oh, essentially, I think she just want to, like, get him out of power. I don't remember if she wants to kill him or not.
Yeah, but basically, make it so she will never have to marry him. In some fashion. And so she's going along the way and gathering her resources and gathering the people. She gets this witch. She has the bone dog. Then there's, like, the sidekick, but the sidekick's, like, the hot guy.
Fairy godmother.
Yeah, the fairy godmother is, like, the witch lady,
She's
sort of. And it's just so funny. The characters are just so... And it is really short, but somehow in this, like, short book... and this is why I love T. Kingfisher. This is her first of the 3 I read from her this year. And she's just so good at being able to make, like, every page count, every word count. I mean, obviously every writer should do that. But like I'm saying, her books are really short, and they have so much impact. And her characters are incredibly well defined, even in, like, a sort of, like, tropey, like, yes, they fit, like, character types, because it's, like, the fairy tale, so they have, like, they fit in the, like the archetype of the different fairy tale characters, but yet they're also super, like, interesting and, like, memorable and well-defined, and it's so much fun, and it reminds me a lot, like, of Neil Gaiman's writing, but, like, different, so it's not, like, just, like, oh, look, it's just another person kind of mimicking his style, so it's similar but different. So if you like Neil Gaiman, you should definitely check out T. Kingfisher. And if you don't like Neil Gaiman or don't know Neil Gaiman, you should check out T. Kingfisher anyway, because she's awesome. She writes, like, horror, she writes fantasy, she writes fairy tales, she writes sci-fi. Like, she does all kinds of things. And she's just, I'm really excited to read, like, everything she has. All right, so now we're moving into your 5 stars.
Yeah. Fun fact, the T in T. Kingfisher stands for Tiddlywinks Magorsh Verlangestone, which is a family name, I guess, that most kingfishers do have.
It's a pen name anyway. It doesn't stand for anything.
Oh. But that's not what I heard. It was that thing I said before that I've now forgotten.
Okay.
Anyway, my 4th book.
Your first 5-star.
My first 5-star Frog Splash book of the year is All the Light We Cannot In Fact See by Anthony Doerr, I believe.
Yeah, Doerr.
This is a pretty intriguing tale. It's yet another World War II story, which, it's not that uncommon. But it's a little bit different than most ones that I've read, because we've got our 2 main characters. One of them is a German radio operations officer. So he's sort of, he's with the Germans, and he's sort of taking part in some of the atrocities. He's not doing that much on his own. His job is to sort of find illegal radio transmissions and point sort of his team to track them down. Then his team just murders the hell out of everyone there. And he's just like, good job, everybody. He doesn't really like that part of the job that much, but he likes radios a lot. And the other main character is a French girl who lives in Saint Malo during
Saint-Malo.
Saint-Malo. Pardonnez-moi pour ma prononciation. It's no bon. Redonk. Anyway, Saint Malo is where she hangs out, and she's got, all the difficulties of being in a city in France that's being bombed by Germany, with the addition of being blind, which obviously makes things difficult. And she also has a MacGuffin that some German dudes want, so she's going to try to, like, avoid them while they search for that. She's a fascinating character. She's one of my favorite characters of the year. And And this book's very good. If you want to read literary fiction about World War II with like a slightly different sort of focus, I think this would definitely qualify. If you're a fan of historical fiction, particularly World War II, this is great. If you like Somalo, then you will probably also find some parts of this to enjoy. But overall, yes, fantastic book.
Does it matter that it's set in Somalo because of like the fact that it's like a walled city?
I mean, it's a small amount. It's not a huge factor. It's involved in the story, but only a little.
I love Somalo. We've been there. It's really cool, and I just thought like it's an interesting setting.
Yeah, it's a great setting. I actually wish there was probably a little more of that. I mean, she spends a lot of time there, but yeah, I wish there was sort of like the geography of I'm not even going to say it again, played into it a little bit heavier than it does. But it's really interesting that the plot ties together very intriguingly. It's an excellent story.
One of my favorite World War II books is also set in France. I think it's just because like so many like World War II books are set in like Germany and Poland
yeah.
or like, and so it's so nice to like see something in a different setting at least, you know, even though it's the same plots really, but
right.
Well,
it's different plot here.
Right, yeah. It's not another of like the same thing, so it's kind of a nice other version of World War II stories. Because, you know, it was a world war.
Yeah, we need more books about the African part of the war.
Yeah, we never get any of that. All right, so my next book is also depressing literary fiction, not historical though. And this is a large, long, chunky, very difficult book to read. This is A Little Life, and I'm not even going to try to say the author's name. I'm not going to say it because I'm sure I'll mispronounce it. So, essentially, the thing is, everyone kept talking about how good this book was, and I kept hearing about it, and I was like, I read the summary, and it's like, 4 guys are friends, and then it follows them from college throughout their lives. And I was like, that doesn't sound that interesting. But the thing with literary fiction is very rarely does the summary sound interesting. Because there's usually not a plot that is what's compelling you to read the story. Most good literary fiction is way more character-driven than plot-driven. Even if the plot's there, it's usually like not as much about the what's happening than the people and the setting and just the way it's written. And so I kind of fell in love with this book right away. I was kind of worried it would be a slow, like, getting into it, and I wouldn't, but I almost instantaneously was, like, in love with these characters. They're so well-rounded. They're so interesting. The main character, Jude, has just, like, the most traumatic life. And again, this book is, like, I don't know, it's very long, and, like, any trigger warning you can think of, content warning, like, is in this book. So if anything bothers you, you probably shouldn't read it, because literally anything in the world that could make you, like, uncomfortable is in this book. But essentially, he had a massive amount of trauma as a child, which has obviously left him emotionally scarred, but also has left him with physical disability. And he has, like, even, like, in college, he just always felt like something was wrong with him. He felt weird because he has a limp. He thinks he's ugly. He just thinks something's off about him. He's always been kind of suicidal. He has a lot of, like, physical scars on him, and so he doesn't want anyone to look at him. And it just goes through their lives. And one of the characters, has a fairly stable life. One has struggles with addiction. One is, like, actually has a pretty successful life, but, and then all of it is about, like, how they connect to Jude and, like, his trauma and his pain. And I've seen negative reviews about the book saying it's misery porn, that it's so, like, unyielding with, like, the sadness and the trauma. But I also think it's I mean, it's a realistic look at someone who has been through some of the worst possible trauma and then continues to have trauma throughout his life and has significant mental health issues and physical health issues. And, you know, it's strangely, like, it's obviously very, very depressing, but it's also sort of strangely, like, uplifting in a way, even though I've got to be honest, like, if you're committing to this, be prepared that this is not going to go well. Like, if you've watched anybody's reviews, if you've seen anyone's vlog while they're reading it, or looked at anyone's, like, journaling as they go through this book, like, every time you think it's going to get better, it doesn't. And it just gets or it gets better for a second, and then something awful happens. So do not hope that this book is going to leave you going, oh, but it all works out in the end. No, it's horrible from beginning to end. But also somehow beautiful and uplifting in a weird way as well. And I love this book. It's incredible. And I mean, it probably should be higher on my list because it's that good. It's probably one of the best books I've ever read. But it's just
3 stars.
Yeah, I know. I should give it to Sir Chonk. I'll be like, 1 star. So what? Some guy said. But it's so like heartbreaking that I don't know if I can ever do it again. You know, like if you've ever seen Schindler's List, you know, it's like you love the movie, but like, do you ever want to sit through it again? Probably not. It's just not fun to watch. So, that's kind of how I feel. I don't know if I'll ever, be able to do it again. So, in the probably oddest transition in the history of BookTube.
Anyway, how long is The Life?
It's like almost 900 and something pages, I think.
That's really long for a comedy. So,
so we're going to make a nice transition here.
Right, yeah. So, I have a very similar book. It's a little shorter, but it also deals with triumphs and tragedies and the complexities of life, and it's Bunnicula. The first book, of course, and in this book we have, of course, the vampire bunny, but we also have the cat and dog, Harold and, what the heck's the little guy's name? Chester. And essentially the cat, Chester, is full of conspiracy theories, right? And he blames Bunnicula for, like, everything, although in his defense, Bunnicula is sucking the color out of the vegetables. And Harold's just like, nah, bro. Nah, chill. And the dynamic between this cat and this dog are hilarious and spectacular, and, like, the mysterious hijinks involved are great. Bunnicula doesn't really do anything except sit in a cage, and hardly has any role except as, like, a plot device, which is a continuing problem for Bunnicula throughout the series. It's mostly the Harold and Chester show, but they're awesome and well worth the chaos. Yeah, it's a book for kids. I don't care. It's amazing. I love it. It's a great freaking book.
I need to reread it because, like, he was like, it's so smart. Like, it is such a fantastically smart book.
Yeah, it's deceptively clever. Just like some things that are in there that, like, you might not pick up on if you're not paying attention. There's, like, literary references. There's, like, foreign language words that are, like, very hilarious when applied to a certain situation. It's great. Very enjoyable.
Right. So, my number 3 is a fantasy sort of folktale story, and this is The Spear Cuts Through Water. And this is essentially, it's kind of multiple stories. It's about the myth of, like, the moon and water and their relationship, like, back in the day, and, like, the mythology and folklore of that. And then it's also about these 2 guys, and, like, they're living in this war-torn country, and then how they're trying to, like, fight the system, and, you know, like, pretty typical kind of fantasy stuff. And then also there's this overarching frame story about, like, someone as he's, like, kind of coming to terms with life and his, like, coming of age, and he lives in, like, a contemporary sort of war-torn country. And I can't really begin to even, like, cover what the plot of this book is, because there's a lot happening. it's
Dude, drag a god across the country and run into hijinks.
yeah, he's like
There you go.
halfway through.
There's the plot.
About
like 80%.
You're 80% now?
Yeah.
He's flying through this book. It's just so beautifully written and incredibly well structured, and it's so unique that I just was like absolutely blown away. Like at the beginning, I was kind of like, I don't think I know what's going on because it's in first, second, and third person narrative, and it's structured weird. And then like I'm not a huge fantasy reader, so like it's in a different world and it's a fantasy world, and I was kind of like, I don't even know what's going on. All these weird things, and it's talking like there's like their communication between these villages is like these tortoises who have like mind control and like telepathy, and then there's like these different like evil like emperors, and they're all fighting for like different, they have their different like areas, and so all this stuff is going on, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go with it because it's so well written. I just did not care. I was just like, I just need to know what's going on in this book. And as it went on, it's so beautiful. And like by the end of this book, I was like, it's both heartbreaking and like also like incredibly uplifting. Like it just makes you kind of be like I also want to like save the world, and you know, like it's like empowering but also like devastating. And I think it's hard to like describe, but like I feel like everyone kind of that I've seen, like this book tends to have like, I don't think enough people have read it or really are talking about it. It's like been out for a few years, and you know, it's kind of weird that it's not like one of the biggest books, that I'm not seeing like a ton of hype for it. But it's kind of one of those things that's like every so often, every couple of months, I'll see somebody include it in like a video, or somebody will have read it, or someone will post something about it in like a Discord or something, and it's just like, oh my God, I loved it. Or I see somebody on like Goodreads has given it like a 5-star review, and it's just kind of like slowly, I think, like infiltrating its way into everyone. But yeah, if you haven't heard about it, you got to go find this book. And if you have heard about it, and I really hope Sir Chonk loves this book, because like I'll be devastated if he doesn't love it when he's done.
Great.
So, all right.
So number 2, I got Dr. Sleep by Stephen King. I read a lot of Stephen King books. I like Stephen King. But I would say it's been a long time since I read a book of his where I was like, damn, this is actually spectacular, and gets 5 stars. But that's what we have here. This, of course, sequel to The Shining. And it reads like old school Stephen King. It's really well paced. He's got fantastic characters, excellent villains. You get a really fully fleshed out character arc for the villains too, which I really like, stories that put the time into like developing the villains in like multifaceted ways, and that's what we have here. So like that's great. And then you also have the heroes, which are connected, of course. Danny Torrance from The Shining is a returning character. He's the main character, of course. Only one of a few main characters. And the new sort of other main character, Abra, is a very interesting, fascinating character as well.
Is this the one where like there's like vampires almost that like survive off of like your pain?
Sort of like that, yeah. That's like, so that the villains are, and there's a bunch of villains, like the main one's Rose, but there's several other villains that are significant. And yeah, essentially they take children who have powers like The Shining, like that Danny has and Abra has, and they search out the world and they find these powerful or hidden powers, and they torture them. And as they torture them, this essence, they call it steam, comes out of the kids, and they feed off that, and that gives them sort of like long life and youth and vitality and stuff. So very similar to vampires in that way. But yeah, the plot's really good. It lacks sort of like that meandering nonsense that Stephen King likes to put in his stories. Doesn't really have that. And the ending, although I would say isn't perfect for what you usually get out of Stephen King, it's really a very satisfying and well executed ending. 5 stars. If you haven't liked a Stephen King book in a while and you've read I would definitely read The Shining before you read this. If you read The Shining but you haven't liked Stephen King in a while, this is definitely one to take a shot on. It's great.
Yeah, this is on. It is still going to be a duology, right? Like, doesn't feel like it's
I don't believe there's. I mean, they could, but I don't think that's likely.
Because I had one of my for that 52 book club is like read a duology, part of a duology. So that's what I'm going to do because I've been waiting to read this as well. So
yeah,
now I'm excited.
Sleep it up.
All right. So since
there's also a cat in it.
Oh,
he doesn't do too much, but he's pretty cool.
Does he survive?
Yes.
Okay. So I just went over a book that I loved and was like emotionally devastating, and how sad I will be if Sir Chonk doesn't love it.
Oh no.
So let's talk to you about number 2, a book that I found emotionally devastating and loved, and that Sir Chonk did not like. And this is Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney. I'm a big Alice Feeney fan. I've just been very satisfied with everything I've read by her. But Daisy Darker was kind of like, if you took all of my favorite things and put them in a book, this is the book. Because it's basically the frame structure here is like pretty much And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. It's a group of people, and they're trapped because of they're on this island where basically when the tide comes in, they're stuck there, and they're being killed off one by one. And there's a poem and everything that's about how they're all dying and how they're each going to die throughout the night. I think it's set on Halloween too, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, and so they're all being murdered, and that I love. And then it's also the main character is this girl who her family kind of treats her like garbage. She's kind of been like outcast her whole life. And so there's a lot of flashbacks to her like adolescence, her youth, and especially like her adolescence and like just feeling like bullied and not feeling like she belonged and like trying to find herself. And I'm a big fan of like YA contemporary about like, girls going through some crap and being sad a lot and, family drama stuff. I don't always love family drama stuff, but I do if it's like good. And like, obviously I like books. I like books either that are like good twisty murder mysteries, or I like, books that deal a lot with like trauma and emotion. And this kind of did all of it. And so I was like, oh, this is just wonderful. And for those people who like are trying to guess the twist, I guessed the twist like in the first few pages. And I remember asking someone, hey, is this what happened? They're like, I'm not telling you. And I actually think I don't know if it made the book better because I guessed it so early. Because as I was reading it, I was like, yeah, everything kind of was confirming my theory. And as a result, I feel like I was like more emotionally invested in it because I was like, I had a bigger emotional impact for me. So it's like, I don't want to spoil it, but I also feel like if you do guess the like big twist, it like shouldn't ruin the book. Like, I think it actually made it better for me. So, so that was my number 2 of the year, and Sir Chonk's number 1.
Blurpity blorp. All right, so I got True Grit by Charles Portis. I've talked about this book a couple times. I'm not going to say too much, but obviously it's a pretty well-known story. It's 2 major films have been released on it. Classic Western. It's narrated by the protagonist, Maddie Ross, who's 13, 14.
She said she's 14 in it, yeah.
And basically her dad is killed by this guy, and so she wants to get revenge, but the guy is headed out into like the sort of deep, dangerous Indian territories, and she can't go on her own, so she needs to find someone to go with her, and she enlists the aid of Rooster Cogburn, a cranky, drunken, violent guy who is down to help, kind of, sort of. And the characters in the story are just fantastic. She's great. He's great. The villain, Ned Pepper, who doesn't get a ton of camera time in the book, but what time he does get is great. He's like not what you would expect for a villain exactly. He's not the guy who killed her parents. There's a whole different guy for that. But anyway, great Western adventure with spectacular characters, and the narration, Maddie, again, this narrator, is she might be my all-time favorite narrator in a book. Definitely in the running for all-time favorite narrators in a book.
So I don't like Westerns at all. I haven't read this, but Sir Chonk, like the few Westerns I've liked, I think was like Bone Tomahawk. I thought Unforgiven was okay.
Okay.
I liked Quick and the Dead. I like Bad Girls.
Oh,
but like the problem I have with westerns, and I always tell Sir Chonk this, is that like, I mean, I can like a story that doesn't have like good female characters in it, but like obviously it's easier to relate to, you know, for me when I was like a female character to root for, and like women are often just absent in westerns, or they're prostitutes, or they're dead. So it's like there's not a whole lot.
Sometimes they're absent, dead prostitutes.
Right, so there's usually not a whole lot for them to do. So like, I often feel like for a western.
Well, Mrs. Miller in McCabe and Mrs. Miller is a madam, so she's not a prostitute herself, but she does run the prostitution house.
Great. So, but like for me, for a western to really work for me, like, I mean, when we're talking about like a movie or something, it needs to be like, it just has to have like such a powerful story and just be so well acted and well written that like, I don't even care that it's a western. And again, it's not like I've never.
Why do you want to rant about westerns for 10 minutes?
Because I wanted to share that you made me watch.
So get to that point.
So he made me watch the new one. Yeah, but I think it's important how I don't like
God.
them generally. So he made me watch the new True Grit with Haley Steinfeld, Seinfeld,
yeah.
and Jeff Bridges.
I think so.
Is that his name?
Yeah, I was getting his name mixed up, but yes.
Wait, no, he's not.
He's the Cookie Monster guy.
He's the Big Lebowski.
Yeah, he's the Big Lebowski.
Oh, okay. So yeah, Jeff Bridges. Jeff Bridges. Jeff Daniels is Dumb and Dumber guy.
Yes.
All right, and then somebody else good's in it.
Matt Damon.
Oh, he's all right.
Barry Pepper.
Barry Pepper plays Ned Pepper, which I think is amazing.
Which is great.
But I gotta say,
Paul Gleason's in it briefly.
I really, really liked this. And it was just like very well crafted. Obviously, yeah, Maddie is amazing. She's an awesome character. And so, like, I was like, oh, this is a great one because it's got a girl. But, like, also, like, it's well done. It's not just like, oh, it's a girl, so that's, like, the only draw.
Yeah, she's awesome. She's one of my favorite characters, I think.
Yeah, I can understand why people love this.
Yeah.
So, even if you're not a Western person, I don't like Westerns, and I think I can understand. So if it's written like the movie.
I mean, well, yeah, the plot's the same. Some of the dialogue in the movie is ripped right out of the book. So, yeah.
So I think I can understand. So my number one, I debated really on which order to put these in, but I ended up going with a book that just surprised the hell out of me. And this is The Afterlife of Holly Chase.
What about that 7.5 Deaths of Potato McGee? Did you read that
I didn't read
year?
that this year.
Oh,
I read it last year, yeah.
I thought you read it this year.
No, well, I think I might have, because, like, my Kindle says I read it this year, but then Goodreads says I read it last year.
So now it's like your top 20 books of all time, so I was a little surprised not to see it in your top 10 list.
No, yeah, but I'm pretty sure I read it last year, so if I didn't, that's just because I can't remember when I read things. Because, like, we didn't really start tracking it very well until, like, May.
Don't blame me for your lack of tracking.
All right, so anyway, so I'm going with The Afterlife of Holly Chase, which I just recently read. But the thing is, I'm a real sucker for A Christmas Carol. And this is a YA retelling of A Christmas Carol. And it was just so well done and so unbelievably, sickeningly cute and just happy and fun. And it was everything I didn't even know I wanted. And I am like, I mean, look at the books I like. I like trauma. I like dark. I like murder mysteries. I like really corrupt and like gray characters and like morally ambiguous stories and bleak endings. And I like when horrible things happen because I think it's realistic and I'm a cynical, grinchy kind of person. And this was just like one big bubblegum, like it's like just a pile of bubblegum. It's cute. It's happy. It's sweet. It's like Christmas in a book. And honestly, I was like, you know what? Like, for a book like this to work, it has to just be really, really fun and really cute. And it just did everything it needed to do. It was adorable. It actually kind of reminds me, like, stylistically and just, like, even plot-wise, a little bit of, like, The Good Place, the show. So if you like that, you might like this. And if you like Christmas Carol, you probably like it. But I mean, it is YA, so it's cute. And the character is unbearable for the first few pages, like for a little bit. Basically, it's about a girl who is an unbearable, horrible person. She's essentially visited by 3 ghosts. She makes fun of them, and then she gets killed because she doesn't learn her lesson like she's supposed to. So in the afterlife, she becomes a ghost of Christmas past for the Scrooge project, where they basically once a year they find a terrible person and try to save their soul, essentially. And so it's like really interesting. And if you like Christmas Carol, there's all these like Christmas Carol Easter eggs. But also it's just like the concept is really fun. And it's just cutesy and fun. And the characters are all really likable. And I will say, I was kind of unsure where it was going. But the ending was like not what I expected. And I think it was just phenomenal how it ended. I just thought it really did something that is kind of unique for YA books. And that's all I'm going to say because I don't really want to ruin it for anyone if you do read it. But I think it really solidified it as like a solid 5-star read and probably my favorite book of the year, just because it was fun. And usually books don't make me happy unless they're just like twisty murder mysteries. So a book to make me this happy had to be put here. So
great. Should I have a 10-minute conversation now about my love of Christmas Carol movies, or no? Just move on. Let's just move on.
Why are you so cynical?
I'm evil.
It's because he didn't read The Afterlife of Holly Chase. That's what he needs to do. And he'll be in a much happier mood.
Maybe I would.
All right. Well, those were our top 10 of the year.
Yeah.
So have you read any of these?
Books that didn't suck.
Do any of these appeal to you? I mean, hopefully you saw some things that maybe are a little different, that you maybe hadn't heard of and are willing to kind of like go out on a limb and we'll try something new.
What are your favorite books so I can tell you how much I didn't like them?
Yeah, he doesn't like anything.
Person.
That's what he does. He reads mine and then tells me how they suck.
Only because most of them suck.
Okay.
Boop.
Bye.